Hi, this is Susie Calkins, author of Death Along the River Fleet, and you're listening to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm Nate Goss, and today we bring you an interview with author Gail Lukasik as part of our Authors Out Loud series. Gail has a brand new book out. The title is White Like Her, My Family's Story of Race and Racial Passing. Now, Gail is known first and foremost as a mystery author. We have several of her books in our collection. And quick side note, she does happen to be a local living right here in Libertyville. But this new book is different. First of all, it is her first nonfiction novel. But secondly, this is a very personal book for Gail because the mystery, and yes, there is still a mystery, revolves around her own mother, Alvera. White Like Her is the story of Alvera's quote-unquote passing. Not just her physical passing, although that is addressed in the book as well, but mainly Alvera's decision to pass for white, almost her entire adult life, a secret that she kept from everyone, even her own husband and daughter. White Like Her is Gail's journey towards understanding why her mother would make this decision and the price she paid for it. Gail's research forced her to dig into the historical context of the Jim Crow South as she researched family history going all the way back to 18th century colonial Louisiana. She also had to dig deep into her own family memories, which could be painful and confusing. Gail met me in our digital studios at the Cook Park Library to talk about what it was like to write the book, discovering a whole new branch in her family, and trying to talk about race in America. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Gail Lukasik. Gail Lukasik, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
And congratulations on the book. As of this taping, it came out this week, right?
It did, on October 17th.
Yes. The book is called White Like Her, My Family's Story of Race and Racial Passing. Just the idea of racial passing was a very new thing to me when I read the book. Would you mind, if other listeners are in the same spot, would you mind just even explaining what this concept is of racial passing?
Okay. People who are of mixed race but visually can pass for white sometimes chose to do that, to pass for white. They might do it for what we call temporary passing, which in African-American communities, people who are living in mixed-race communities, African-American communities, might decide to step out of that community for work and put down that they're white. And I'm thinking back to my mother's generation now, which, she was born in 1921. So we're talking about Jim Crow South, born and raised in New Orleans. At that time period, there actually would be employment listed white supply only, or they would use the term Negroes. Negroes need not apply. So people who could pass for white would do that. And, this is a complicated issue. Of course, yes. Yeah. And that's really what your book is sort of diving headfirst into that complication. Yeah. So this is really your story. It's a very personal story. It is.
I shouldn't say it's your story. It's mostly about your mother.
It's my mother's story.
Alvera
yes.
is the name of your mother. And the book actually, much like a family tree, it just keeps spreading and spreading and getting deeper and deeper as you're doing more research into your mother's past. So could you maybe just give us your version of a summarized description of the journey overall that you take the readers through in this book?
Sure. The journey started in 1995. This is before Ancestry.com, was before you really had the internet. And I decided that I wanted to find out more or something about my grandfather, my mother's father, Azimaf Frederick. He's my mystery man. He was. I'd never seen a photograph of him. I knew nothing about him. Every time I asked my mother, she would say something like, well, my parents divorced when I was 6 and I wasn't raised by my father, so I know very little about him. So I drove to the Buffalo Grove Family Research Center and started looking through the microfilm. I found him on the 1900 Louisiana census records, and next to his name and all the Fredericks were the letter B. And as I found out, I went to the head of that column, and it was for race. I was shocked. I had no idea. So I quickly looked at the 1930 census, found him again, and now he has a W next to his name. So now I'm really confused. I have no idea what's going on. So that started my journey. I did get more information before I talked to my mother about this because this is not a conversation we have on a telephone. So what I did first was I wrote to Louisiana as if I was my mother, and I said I lost my birth certificate.
Okay. Clever. Huh?
Yeah, well, one of my friends told me to do this. And I said, I really would like a copy. And here's where I'm living now. So I did receive the copy, and on the birth certificate was written COL in parentheses, and that was for colored. I wanted another clarification. I'm a researcher.
Right.
So I wrote again to the state, and I said, please explain to me what COL means. And indeed, it meant colored. And they said, in most cases, that's of African descent. Okay, so I had my evidence, and then when my mother did come to visit, this was after my father had passed away, I did ask her about it, and at first she denied it. And then when I told her I had all this information from the state, she got very frightened, and actually she looked like she got small. And she said, you have to promise me you can never tell anyone about this. No one in the family can know until after I pass away.
Because as far as you were concerned, you had lived a completely, what we would call, white
Oh, absolutely.
experience. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I thought. I'm a white woman. Where did this come from?
Yeah.
So I kept that secret for 17 years. There were a few times I tried to get my mother to talk, and every time I did, she changed the subject. So in 2014, and I have to thank Cook Library for this, they put out a newsletter, and there's a genealogical section to it. And my husband saw there that Genealogy Roadshow was looking for family stories and mysteries, so I applied.
And this is the popular PBS show,
Yes,
Genealogy Roadshow.
Yes, it was the second season. They were looking for stories. I applied. I was on the show, and they confirmed my mixed race heritage, and they were able to trace the family back to, I want to say, 1792 to an ancestor by the name of Urson Frederick. So that started the journey.
Yeah.
I mean, this
That's
journey
really
gets
the tip of the iceberg.
That's just the beginning of this amazing story. So the show aired on a Tuesday. On that Friday, when I opened my email, I have an email from a woman who says her name is Stephanie Frederick. I have never heard of Stephanie Frederick. I started reading the email, and she said, my father is Azima Frederick Jr. Welcome to the family.
Wow.
I had tears just streaming down my face. I went in April. They had a wonderful party for me. I met my other family, and we are now, I'm now part of a multicultural, multiracial racial family.
It's a really beautiful thing. I mean, your story gained most of this attention after being on PBS's Genealogy Roadshow. And, in your book, you actually talk about really how selective the process is and how they choose who gets to be on the show. But beyond even just being selected for the show, you were actually the host, Kenyatta Berry's favorite segment of the season.
I was.
And she actually wrote the foreword in your book.
She wrote the foreword.
So what do you think it is about your story that's so captivating to people?
I think there's several elements. I know Kenyatta said to me, in fact, she talks about it in the foreword to the book. She said that in the African American community, everyone knows about passing for white, but it's not talked about. One of the no-nos is you don't out someone who is passing. You just don't do that. So she said that part of the story was fascinating to her, and she wanted that out in the public. And when I think about the choices my mother had to make, it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because in order for her to pass, she had to leave her family. She had to leave her family in New Orleans, actually distance herself from certain members who were not, and I'm going to use this term in quotation marks, passably white. Mm-hmm. That's a term that I learned from my research that I didn't know about. Yeah. So it's a hard decision, and I'm firmly convinced my father, who is white, had no idea. So she had to lead an unauthentic life in some ways. The community I grew up in Ohio, Parma, Ohio, was very, very white. And I grew up hearing racial slurs and that kind of talk. And my mother had to tolerate it. Mm-hmm. She had to hear it. She had to live with it. That must have been so hard for her.
Yeah.
I think about that. It really breaks my heart when I think about that.
I could see that. And that comes through a lot in the book, I think, too. Just how it's almost like she had to live undercover. Like as
she
if
did.
Like if she was just
totally.
her whole life pretending.
Yeah, and I think I refer to it as if she was in the witness protection program or something, because she could never be her real self. And my mother had what I considered at the time quirky behaviors that now I understand.
They make a little more sense.
Yeah, like she totally would not go out in the sun unless she had a hat on. She was always covered up. She was very careful with her skin. Always had a made-up face. She was very into makeup. She actually would wear light foundation makeup to bed. No photographs of certain members of the family. I have very few photographs of her family.
And you even talk about how she had to learn how to be white and what that means, and things like going to the movies with you and sort of taking on those characteristics of the female leads in those movies,
Like I said, I did a lot of reading about passing and trying to understand it, because it's not something, obviously, that I'm that familiar with other than through my mother and reading about it. But part of passing for white is not just looking white. I think in my mother's way of thinking of it, she decided that she also had to act. And I'm going to put that also
in quotations.
Yeah, she had to act white, whatever that meant to her. And she did use movies as her sort of guidebook to whiteness. But yeah, she did that.
So I'm actually going to take a question that you ask yourself in the book, and I'm just going to re-ask it to you, really.
Oh, boy.
And I know it's a really complicated question, but I want to hear a response anyways.
Oh, okay. I hope I can answer it.
But you write, quote, "I have no claim on Black identity, no right to even declare myself mixed race. And yet my African ancestry is there in my DNA, 7 to 9%. More than one drop, enough that up until 1983 in Louisiana, I would have been designated as Black." So then you ask yourself, what does it mean for a blatantly white woman to tell the story of her distant slave ancestor? What does it mean to you?
Even asking that question of me, I get chills.
Yeah.
I do. I feel a heavy responsibility to tell this story correctly, but to make no claims, because how can I? I enjoyed, and I still enjoy, white privilege my whole entire life. And it really does make a difference. Yet I feel so strongly about my ancestors, my mixed-race ancestors and my African ancestors, that they didn't have a voice. Marta, the enslaved woman that I talk about in the book, she didn't even have a last name. And if I can stand in her truth, if I can say something for her, then I want to do that. I'm a witness. That's how I look at it. And part of this was I wanted to mitigate some of the shame I saw that day my mother revealed to me when she said, "How will I hold my head up with my friends?"
Yeah.
That broke my heart. Yeah. So
in some ways, you actually have a very unique perspective, because you're someone who has assumed whiteness your entire life.
Oh, yeah.
Until you were personally confronted with the complexities of racial identity. So I guess I want to ask, from your perspective, why do you think it is so hard for specifically white people to talk about race?
I think that's a very complex as well answer. I think part of it is guilt. We know about slavery. There's nothing, that people don't know. They don't know how to deal with it. The legacy of slavery. I also think, even though we're in the 21st century, we're still living in certain respects in segregated communities. Mm-hmm. So if an African American person isn't your neighbor, then you're not seeing them on a daily basis. You're not interacting in certain ways. I think that makes it difficult to talk about race. I think it's important we talk. It doesn't matter if we get it right all the time, because we don't. And when I have a chapter in here where I talk about what do we talk about when we talk about race, because
it's a great chapter. Yeah.
Thank you. Because the reactions my audience were mostly white, I would say, and people were so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to act like I have some great wisdom or,
Right,
you know what
right.
I mean? I don't. I'm struggling like everybody else to talk about this.
Right, and to that point, now that you know all of this about yourself, and you know a lot more about the complications of how you even identify as a certain race or ethnicity, what does celebrating ethnic diversity or celebrating your own culture mean to you? Because, on one hand, we as a society want to encourage people of different backgrounds to celebrate who they are and, to see the beauty in all the different types of people that are out there and backgrounds. But on the other hand, as your book really meticulously demonstrates, once you start trying to kind of parse out who's who, it starts to border on the absurd. I mean, you talk about things like the paper bag test, which was it's just wild, And then also you were talking about one of your mother's cousins in New Orleans. You said, quote, her ability to sit in either the black or white sections of a restaurant points out the absurdity of segregation and racial categories. So, unquote. So I guess a question I have is, to what degree do you feel we should, quote, see color, I guess?
I look at race and color as a social construct. That's where the book took me, and that's how I view it. But I think we're always going to be visually oriented. But I think if we could see past these categories, we would do better. We would do better in our culture.
I still see on some, applications and surveys, I still occasionally see the demographic question that asks about ethnicity and
right.
They never force you to answer it. Although I've never thought twice about just checking Caucasian or white, What are your feelings when you see that question now? Or do you feel like, why are we even asking that?
Yeah, I do question, why are we even asking it? And when I see it, my reaction is, yes, I could check other. I have every right to check other. But do I have the right? I mean, do I really have the right to check other when I have enjoyed so much privilege in my own life?
Mm-hmm. Do you imagine that your book, White Like Her, do you think it works differently, or it has different lessons for white readers versus an African-American reader? Like, do you think there's different takeaways?
I'm guessing there will be. I'm not sure. I know it's a hard question to answer because I don't know. I mean, it's as an author, and all of us, I know a lot of authors, we talk about once the book's done, and,
right.
And then it's out there in the world, it's no longer yours.
So many parts of this book are you recounting very personal memories.
Yes.
And of specific interactions with your mother and your relationship with your father.
Right.
What was it like to get that out, to take the time to write that out in detail?
One or two of those scenes I had written long ago because I needed to. So I put them in the context of the story because they needed to be there. In my mind, one of the things I wanted to show that this is my interpretation now, that my mother stayed in her marriage because of her secret. I can't prove that, but I can't not believe that wasn't part of it. She really didn't have a home to go home to. Even, I have to tell you, even the final copy edit, when you have to copy edit your book, and you have to really read it closely again, were very hard for me because they're so personal, and they're especially the chapter on my mother's death. It's very hard for me. It took a lot out of me but that's my job as an author, right? It's difficult, and now that I know it's out there, it's even more difficult. Like, you sit in a room as an author, and this is so great. And then it's like, oh, really, it's out there.
Yeah.
And now I have to share it with the world.
Well, I can speak as a reader that it makes it very moving.
Oh, thank you. That's so reassuring.
When I was reading the stuff mostly about your father, who we should say, I think, and you assume that he actually never knew the secrets.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And I even asked my mother's cousin, Eula, and she says, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you actually bring a lot of your father into this as well, and it almost takes on another narrative all in itself. Just the way he fought in the Pacific in World War II, came back with very severe PTSD,
Very severe.
Undiagnosed, obviously, because
Right.
this was before
And not really treated.
right, and was a functioning alcoholic.
He was, totally.
It adds this yet another level of kind of tragedy and complication to your story. Now, you talk a lot in your book about how your perspective of your mother changed as you were writing the book and doing this research, and that you became more sympathetic to what she went through and what she did. Did a similar thing happen with your father?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I saw my father, and he's so heroic to go through what he went through, and then to come home and be so damaged and not have any assistance. The government made it difficult for him even to get his benefits.
Yeah,
after what he went through. It breaks my heart. Again, I mean, as a child, you're not going to understand that because you're living it and you're going through a difficult period or whatever. But now I totally have admiration for what he did and how he served his country.
I mean, that's just what really comes through to me, is that these are, as a reader, they're kind of characters,
Yes.
but they're so fully fleshed out because you lived it.
I did.
Actually, I wanted to ask you a question about just sort of the process of writing the book, aside from the research, which is very in-depth. You're a mystery author. This is your first foray into nonfiction, is that correct?
Well, other than articles, I've done quite a number of articles, but the first book,
I think what really caught me when I was reading this is actually how much it kind of reads like a mystery.
Oh,
in
good.
ways.
That was my intention.
Was it? Okay, good.
Totally.
Yeah. It does certainly help with keeping you engrossed, I think, in this. And it has a mystery feel because you're always trying to look at, the clues of your own family history to understand your mother. But this time, you're the detective.
I am.
You're the detective, and this is real life, so you really don't know where this is going to lead.
I didn't.
So this mystery is kind of writing itself. And I guess my question is, what was it like to write a mystery where you have such a small amount of control? In all your other mysteries, you know exactly what's going to happen.
Exciting. I was in 100%. I was on a mission. I was totally on a mission, and I was going to allow it to take me wherever it wanted to take me. I was open to whatever I found. There were not only people who were enslaved, but we had slave owners in the family. And I wanted all that out there because that's part of this.
Yeah.
You're not going to understand race in America if you don't understand that. You can't hide things and pretend they didn't happen. We got to do better.
Yeah.
We just have to do better. If the only thing this book accomplishes is to get people talking about race and racial identity, because that's very confusing as well, wow, job done.
Yeah.
Job done here.
What's next for you, Gail? What's after this? This is a...
Wow. Well, I recently turned in a historical novel to my agent. I haven't heard back. Part of the book takes place in 1943 in Warsaw, Poland. And there's a Christian woman who is working for the underground, and she is tasked with rescuing 2 Jewish children and taking them to a Catholic convent. And then the other part takes place in 1969 during the Vietnam War. She ends up in a state mental hospital.
Wow.
And the nurse who's taking care of her is her husband has just been killed in Vietnam.
And is it completed, or is it...
Oh, it's all done.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I was 2/3 through the book when all this happened, when White Like Her, the whole thing. So I had to table it.
And you said before that you're doing a lot of speaking engagements now.
I did a whole year right after the show aired, and a lot of libraries, genealogical societies wanted me to come and talk about it.
Yeah. It is a very startling and very fascinating story.
Thank you.
And it's such a good springboard into so much of what our country it really
especially
needs to
right
deal
now,
with.
don't you think?
Absolutely.
Where we're
Absolutely.
at right now,
Yeah. I found it to be actually a very important book for me to read.
Thank you.
I think so. So
wow.
I'm so
that
happy.
Makes me feel good.
I'm so happy that you wrote it and I had a chance to read it.
Thank you.
We ask this of all of our authors when we have them in. It's just sort of a fun last question, but we're always curious. What are you reading right now?
I read 2 really outstanding. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but The Lost City of the Monkey God, it's National Geographic had this group of scientists and a journalist go looking for this lost city in, I want to say, somewhere in the Amazon. I don't remember exact details. And they do find something,
Okay.
but what happens to them is fascinating
Okay.
as a result of this. The other one is, it's the one about the Native American tribe. Something of the Flower Moon.
Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yes. Oh my goodness, that was so good.
Killers of the Flower Moon, David Gran.
That was really good. Yeah, I guess my fiction isn't measuring up as much.
No, that's all right. It's good to get some nonfiction picks too.
Yeah, I know. I don't.
Maybe you're just in that mood now that you've got a nonfiction book out.
Or I'm appreciating the nonfiction writers more or something.
Yeah. Well, Gail Lukasik, thank you so much for coming on the podcast once again. And again, I hope everyone reads this book. It's a really great book, and I'm just thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much, Nate. It was a pleasure.
All right, so that was my conversation with Gail Lukasik. I really hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank her once again for taking the time to stop by. Gail is actually going to be at Cook Park Library to discuss the book further on Tuesday, November 7th from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. As of now, there are still openings, so I really encourage you all to head over to our website, cooklib.org, to register for that event, or you can always stop by the reference desk at the library, and we'll be happy to sign you up. While you're on our website, check out Shelf Life, the library's blog, which can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. That's where other librarians regularly post what they're reading, and you will also find local history stories, genealogy advice, and past episodes of this podcast. For example, if you like our author interviews, go back and listen to the last one that Lindsay did with Elizabeth Berg, talking about her new book, The Story of Arthur Truelove, which is going to be released shortly. If you like this podcast, share it with others and let them know that they can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or really anywhere that they like to get their podcasts. And, while I'm talking about Apple Podcasts, one of the best ways that you can help out this podcast is by leaving us a nice rating there. Before we go, we just want to let you know that we do want to hear from you, our listeners. You can talk to us anytime on Twitter. At Cook Library is our handle. Or you can always send us an email. Send that message to webmaster@cooklib.org. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.